Alright, I'm going to show you now how to build a soft clay sculpture using the slab that we just rolled on the slab roller. The first thing I want to do is get a couple things drying before I jump right into the bulk of it. What I have here is just a ball of clay. What I'm going to be doing is, for you today, is I'm going to be building a tall mug. Some people call it a stein. I'm going to be attaching a handle to it, and I'm going to be showing you some of the molds that I made and some press mold action. So first what I'm going to do is take a ball of clay like this, getting my hand wet, grabbing 2/3 of the clay, and just start to draw it down towards the bottom, letting gravity assist me in this. Just using my index finger and my thumb, I'm just pulling the clay straight down. I'm trying to create this tapered handle effect. Since I'm using my hand to make it, at the end it should be very comfortable in my hand. I'm trying to keep the top of the handle thicker and start to taper it towards the bottom. Getting my hand wet again, working the clay in a downward motion. I think that should do. So I'm going to take it, and then just by bending it and attaching it to the table here, it's going to start to set up. Clean my hands up. All right. Well, the next thing I want to do is talk to you a little bit about this plaster mold that I made. I used this bolt and this nut to take an impression of it. All right. You want to make sure when you're making a press mold that once you're done, you apply this mold soap to it so that it helps the clay release from the mold without a bunch of buildup. You simply want to take a ball of clay and just begin to press it in to the mold. Not worrying about the excess at this point, just scrape it off and use it to make another one. So I'm just working the clay down into the mold. You can see it starting to extrude through the back side here. So I'm simply going to use that to my advantage, using my finger and pushing it back through. And you get this nice nut shape that I'll be showing you how to use in just a little while. So I'm going to have that setting off to the side as well with the handle. Okay, let's get back to the slab that we rolled. What I want to do is I want to determine how tall I want this mug to be. I also want to use a piece of newspaper in this case between my form that I'm going to be using, which happens to be this piece of 3-inch PVC pipe. All right. I think I'm going to stick to somewhere around, I don't know, 9 inches. So I'm going to take my X-Acto knife here and simply make a mark on the clay on how tall I want it to be. Now I'm going to set the PVC off to the side, grabbing my straight edge with my X-Acto knife. I'm going to score and cut the clay. All right. With that done, this excess clay I'm going to set off to the side because I will be showing you how to use that in a few. So back to the newspaper. Now that I have that clean straight edge, that's where I'm going to line the bottom of my PVC pipe too. All right. So with all edges lined up at the bottom, I'm just going to begin rolling the slab until it meets the other end. Once I see where it's going to meet, I'm going to take my knife again. I'm going to make a mark I'm gonna roll it back out, set it off to the side again, removing the newspaper. I'm using the newspaper so that the clay does not fuse itself to the PVC pipe. That's a bad thing. So, now I've determined how much clay I'm going to need for the vessel, setting that excess off to the side. Now back to using the newspaper again. I'm going to lay it down between the clay and the piece of PVC pipe. And I've got a little extra. I'm just gonna fold. So back to the piece of PVC pipe, and with the newspaper between the clay, I'm going to roll the clay back onto the piece of pipe. Now, once I've got both sides touching, I'm going to stand it up onto my piece of canvas here. I'm going to fold back the edge just a little bit so that I can take my needle tool, and I'm going to begin to scratch and score in a cross-hatching motion on both edges. Once I've got both edges scored, I'm going to use what's called slip, almost like a glue. So I'm going to just apply that using my finger, up and down to the edge. Not worried about if it's going to squeeze out at the moment, because I'll clean that up with my sponge. So back to meeting both edges back together. I'm going to just press them until I see the slip start to squeeze out. I don't know if you can see that. See the slip? So as the slip starts to squeeze out, I know I've got a decent compression seal. All right, so back to using some of this extra clay. I want to get my bottom established. So, just simply setting the cylinder down on the clay. I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and simply score around, leaving a little bit of extra clay so that I can use that to compress to the walls of the cylinder. And I'm just going to take the excess off around here so I don't lose it. So, with the bottom now cut out, I'm going to simply set it up. The bottom should not be attached because I have not scored and used any slip yet. So, going around the edge with my needle tool, scoring the edge in more of a cross-hatching motion. Be loose with this part. You don't have to be real particular. And it's always good to go ahead and score the bottom of the piece as well. With that done, I'm going to simply take some of the slip and apply it to the bottom using just my finger. Okay. Now with both sides scored, slip on one side, I'm now able to wiggle and compress the bottom and the base, I'm sorry, the bottom and the walls together. Just like that. And then now there's a good time to take your finger and start to clean up some of the extra slip that might be coming out. All right, there's a few things that you can do at this point. One is to add some texture to it. I like this real stiff little scrub brush. So I'm going to just pick some areas and start to add the texture to. Before I get too far, I want to use some of these little ribs. Each side has a different different configuration to it. So just going around and adding some of that texture in to the piece as well. As you see, as I'm scratching some of the surface, you'll see these little raised areas of clay. Those will just flake off as they dry. So don't worry about cleaning those up right now, because all you're going to do is smooth it out and lose a lot of that character. So back to using this brush, I want to just kind of tap around that edge, and then making sure that you address all sides. With that being done, it's safe now to go ahead and pull out your PVC piece. All right, no longer need that. The newspaper in here is fine. I tend to just get rid of it though, because it's no longer needed as well. One thing to do while you have the newspaper out is just to go ahead and deal with this extra slip that's on the bottom from the base while it's still in that real wet stage. And all I'm going to be doing is taking my finger and going around the inside rim, so that, you know, after this thing's glazed and fired, it will hold water. So I'm not adding any clay, any slip or any water. I'm just going to use what's down there, taking my finger and just going around the outside, just real gently, just to make sure everything is smooth. All right, with that done now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to using a turntable. And this is the part most people really enjoy, which is the decorating. So on a turntable, now you can somewhat sit down and get a little bit more comfortable and relaxed. I'm going to take my sponge here, and before the clay gets too dry, I want to make sure that I soften that edge, just rounding over that top edge, so that if someone was to drink out of this, they wouldn't have a hard edge against their lip. So with that cleaned up, that's really all that needs to really happen there. Now, you can go through and compress a lot of this, but what I'm going to do, I'm talking about the seam here, you can go through and compress that, but what I think I'm going to do is that's going to be one of my main decorating points, or one of the add-on pieces I'm gonna work on. Back to using those, some of those press mold pieces, the nuts. I'm going to just trim them with my X-Acto knife, not changing any of the outside shape, but just cleaning off some of that sprue that came through. Also going to deal with just changing how thick they are. All right, for this piece, I don't want it to be too overwhelming. So what I've done is just cut it in half. All right, so there's the other half. I'll set it aside. We may use it. Back to another one. You get the idea that just using a knife to clean up some of this press mold stuff is that easy. All right, not changing it too much, just enough to clean up some of them. All right, I think what I want to do here is I'm thinking about adding maybe some bandings here, and actually having them appear as though they were bolted on and closing this cylinder together. So let me get my knife and I'm just going to cut a few strips. Alright, so just still using some of that slab. I've cut just some strips, or a strip in this case. And I'm just going to take my knife and just cut it. And kind of loosely imperfect that edge just a little bit so it's not so clean. I'm just going to pick a spot on here that I think might be decent. I kind of like that angle. So with it held there in place, I'm going to grab my needle tool. All right, just holding it there, I'm just going to make a few little registration marks so I know where to score and I know where to apply the slip. So with that being said, needle tool out, just scratching and scoring, cross-hatching the surface, back to the strip, doing the same thing, the main points of contact, scoring it. I'm also going to score it here in the middle just for an extra insurance. So taking some slip, dabbing it on. Don't go overkill, but just enough that you're almost gluing in a way this on. So back to where I marked it, I'm going to just compress using my hand on the inside and on the outside, even pressure, letting it fall and form around the piece. All right, with that done, I like to sometimes just have an extra little paintbrush, get it damp just a little bit, and then go around and just take some of that slip and force it in some of those cracks. I still want to leave somewhat of a separation so that you can tell that it's a strap and it's not just a bulge in the form. All right, well, since I have this other little half to that strip, let's just go ahead and let's put another one on there. I kind of like the idea of that diagonal. That's kind of interesting. So taking my needle tool again, marking where the registration is. Right? You can see where I've just made those registration marks, scoring it back and forth. And some of that texture from the beginning really helps too. So scoring, just cross-hatching across the piece with my needle tool. Going back to adding some slip, not too much, just enough. And I'm simply going to just press it, holding pressure on the inside, working it around, marrying the two edges together. All right, using my finger to kind of take off some of those tool marks. Right. I'm really liking how that looks. I like how that it dips in and out. It kind of models the form. I like that there's not you know, a whole lot of visual weight there. It kind of looks like it belongs. The shape of the cylinder has not changed, which is nice. I've just been adding to it. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it appear that these straps on here are bolted on, of all things, bolted on with some of these bolt heads that are nuts that I have pressed into the plaster mold in the beginning. So I've already scored each one of the bands. You already know that I'm going to put 4 on there because I've scored 4 places. So going through, cross-hatching on the nut here, going back to our friend slip, taking that and then just applying it to the piece and wiggling it back and forth. Now there's quite a bit of slip coming out of there. I'm going to let that just set up for a few, and I'll come back and clean that up with the brush. So taking the needle tool again, scoring the back side, grabbing more of the slip, just dabbing some on there. Turn to where you can see it. I'm just actually wiggling it into place, letting the slip come out. Let me find a couple more. Maybe something that looks a little bit irregular. Let's go way over here and see what this one looks like. It already is corroded, rusted out of shape. A lot of buildup of rust. And that'll come out in some of the glazing effects that I want to go for. I want to make sure that a lot of the irregular textures go along with some of the irregular colors. So back to using the needle tool again. Scoring it. Slip. Too much. Slip. Back to the band, working it in, pushing it out from the outside as well, wiggling it into place. Still letting that slip set up a little bit. Let's see, let me grab one more and see. Maybe this guy looks like it's really been tightened up on there. It's a little shorter. Needle tool, scoring it again. Lifting it on there. Back to so you can see it in the video here. Moving it back and forth, squeezing it, and leaving it how it is. I'm going to dampen just a brush just a little bit to help marry some of that slip around. I don't want to lose the edge of that nut though in the band. I want them to appear to be separate pieces because they are. Alright, so just feathering some of those areas where the slip has protruded out, going back to where the band meets the cylinder too. Alright, you see a lot of what I'm showing. I'm going along one of the edges here, going around each one of the nut heads here, but I'm keeping it really light-handed so that I'm not losing some of that texture that's on there. All right, now just very lightly I want to take this brush and indicate that the rust is not only on the form, but it's also on some of the banding and some of the nuts here. Just a little bit. And that's where when you go to glazing it will build up in those areas just like rust does, right? Just like rust does. All right, so I'm pretty pleased with this form. All right, so the next thing I really want to talk to you about is how to attach a handle. I think our handle should be set up at this point, so I'm going to grab it. I'm thinking, you know, of having a handle do something like this, kind of model the same thickness or the same configuration to the bands across there. I might also even think about bolting it on. I'm not sure. Let's just see how it looks. So grabbing the handle from the edge of the table here, that's how I had it drooped over. All right. So it's set up so it's a little leather hard, which is good. All right. Now I'm going to, let's see, I can use my knife. Just taking my X-Acto knife, I'm going to score along the edge here. Not trying to cut it all at once because that sometimes can distort the form. So just cutting through and then cutting the rest of the way through. All right. So here's what the handle shape looks like. All right. And that's kind of what I'm wanting it to, where I want it to go. I also want it to meet at a second spot down here. So what I want to do is just gently start to form the handle into that type of shape to where I can meet it at two different spots. Okay. Now turning it, I want to make sure that I dampen the piece. Right? Dampening it. And grab that other knife. Scissors over it. So, using the scissors, I'm going to cut some of that extra clay off. So, I'm going to score with the needle tool the edge of the handle there, right? And then I'm going to determine where I want it to attach up here. I'm going to also score there. Okay, so using some of the slip, maybe a little too much slip there. Going to simply press from the inside to the outside until I get a nice contact. Once again, not worry too much about the extra slip that's coming out. So, let's talk about a few things we've got. We've got the bands on there, we've got the texture on there, we've used the press mold nuts, we've got the handle attached, and then one last thing to do is to attach the handle to the bottom there. So I'm just going to press and make an indentation where I know it's going to go. And this might be the area that I might want to add one of those extra nuts that we've applied. So, back to using the X-Acto knife. I'm going to cut some of the clay off and to clean my knife. And then I'm going to simply score on both sides of the handle there. I think I'm going to add a strap too. Let's see what I got here. Let's just make it look like the whole thing is just strapped together. So, scoring both edges. Right? Going back to more slip. Slip, slip, slip. Sometimes you have to just add some water if you want to add more slip. And then I want to add some slip to the handle is. I'm going to simply take this piece of clay and mold it from inside and outside, making them all connect as one. as it starts to set up, you can go back and manipulate some of this, but for demo's sake, the handle's still a little soft. What a lot of people will do is they can take newspaper, something like this, they can ball it up, and they can force it into, let me show you one second. They can force it into the handle part here, and as it dries, it'll stay into that configuration. But to move on here, because of time, I want to make sure I will show you these last two bolts get attached. So I've got one scored. Should have scored this first, but I didn't. Let's get it scored. Score, 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 score. And let me grab one more of my stockpile here of these pressed mold pieces. Smoothing out some of that, taking some of that thickness off. Score, score, score. And we might have enough slip. There we go. And slip, slip, slip. And I don't know if you can see in the video here, but I'm just pushing and working that nut on there till I feel it start to suction. Here's that second one, and working it into the piece as well. I'm really liking how this all is coming together. You know, sometimes you can overthink a lot of these things, you can overwork a lot of these things, you can over-analyze these things. So, back to the brush. I'm not going to add any water because I have lots of slip everywhere. So I'm just going to spend the next minute or two here going around, cleaning up all of my edges, making sure everything's welded nicely together, right? Because if it's not, it will show up in the firing. All right, things will crack, things will split, bad things happen. All right, so readdressing the top edge there where some of that slip came out, going underneath there and making sure all of that is welded nice and tight. Giving it one more look over, and I think I'm pleased with that. I hope you learned something. I hope you, well, let me show you one more thing real quick. Is on the bottom here, it's on a piece of paper. All right, as it sets up, I can come back and clean that edge up as well, just with a damp sponge. Well, I'm Scott Murray. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is soft sculpture using a slab roller, using a press mold, and using or showing you how to pull a handle. All right, let me give you one spin around, and there you go. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.